The tenant farmer's plow hit something hard in the Delaware soil. He stopped his horse and bent down to investigate. What he pulled from the earth wasn't a rock or old farming equipment. It was a small human skull. The farmer dropped it immediately and stepped back. His hands were shaking as he looked at the ground around him. More bones were scattered throughout the dirt. He counted them quietly. One skeleton, then another, then a third. The smallest bones belonged to a child, maybe 5 years old. This was April 1829 on property owned by a woman named Patty Cannon. She lived just a few miles away with her daughter and son-in-law. The farmer ran to tell the authorities. He had no idea he'd just uncovered one of America's most shocking family crime operations. 4 bodies buried in a field, all of them black, all of them murdered. But this wasn't just about one killer. This was about an entire family that had turned kidnapping and murder into a business. For over a decade they had worked together, mother, daughter, and son-in-law. They had killed together, buried bodies together, and counted money together. The authorities would soon learn that 4 bodies were just the beginning. This is one of the most haunting crimes in recorded history. If you're interested in real crime stories that reveal the darkest sides of human behavior, subscribe and turn on notifications for more true crime content. Patty Cannon was born around 1760, though no one knows her exact birth date. Some records suggest her real name was Lucretia Patricia Hanley. She grew up during the Revolutionary War. Times were hard for most families. Money was scarce and survival meant doing whatever it took. Patty married a local farmer named Jesse Cannon. They settled near what is now Reliance, Delaware. It was right on the border between Maryland and Delaware. This location would become crucial to their crimes. When police came looking in one state, they could simply walk across the border to the other. Patty and Jesse had at least one daughter together. Jesse died around 1826, leaving Patty to manage things alone. But Patty wasn't alone for long. Her daughter had married twice. Both husbands were criminals. The first husband was Henry Brighton, a blacksmith. He kidnapped free black people and sold them into slavery. He was caught and imprisoned in 1811, but escaped from jail. Authorities caught him again and hanged him for murder. After Brighton's death, Patty's daughter married Joe Johnson. Johnson owned a tavern a few miles from Patty's house. Johnson would become Patty's most important partner in crime. Together, they would build what people called the Reverse Underground Railroad. While the real Underground Railroad helped slaves escape to freedom, the Cannon-Johnson gang did the opposite. They kidnapped free black people and sold them back into slavery. By 1829, this family operation had been running for over 10 years. They had kidnapped hundreds of people, and they had killed anyone who got in their way. The family worked as a team. Patty provided the house where victims were hidden. Johnson provided the tavern and boats for transportation. Patty's daughter helped manage the captives and enjoyed watching her husband beat them. They also recruited other criminals to help. Some were white, some were black or mixed race. The black accomplices were especially valuable because they could approach free black people without raising suspicion. One key member was John Purnell, a mixed-race man who used several fake names. He served as a decoy to get young black men onto their boats. Another member was Henry Carr, who helped with kidnappings and transportation. The gang even included Robert Brighton, a relative of Patty's first son-in-law. Crime seemed to run in all the families involved, but what made this case truly disturbing wasn't just the kidnapping and selling of people, it was the casual way they murdered anyone who became inconvenient. Children who cried too much, adults who insisted they were free, witnesses who knew too much. The Cannon family killed them all, and they buried the bodies on their own property. The Cannon-Johnson gang operated during a perfect storm of historical circumstances. Congress had banned importing new slaves from Africa in 1807. At the same time, cotton farming was exploding in the Deep South. The cotton gin made short staple cotton profitable. Plantation owners needed more workers than ever. This created huge demand for slaves within America. Prices shot up dramatically. A single slave could sell for thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, thousands of free black people lived in Maryland, Delaware, and nearby Philadelphia. Many had been freed after the Revolutionary War. Others were born free to mixed-race families. Philadelphia had the largest free black population in the North, but it had no professional police force. This made it easy hunting ground for kidnappers. The Cannon gang took advantage of all these factors. They could kidnap free people in the north and sell them for huge profits in the south. Local white communities usually didn't care what happened to black people, even when families reported missing relatives. Authorities rarely investigated. The gang's methods were carefully planned. They would approach free black people, especially young men, at waterfront areas. They offered jobs on boats or help with work. Once the victims were isolated, gang members would overpower them. They used chains and ropes to secure their captives. The victims were then hidden in secret rooms in Patty's house. Some were kept in the basement, others were locked in the attic. Joe Johnson kept all captives in leg irons. If anyone insisted they were free, he would whip them severely. His goal was to break their spirit before selling them. Johnson's wife, Patty's daughter, actually enjoyed watching the beatings. She was overheard saying, "It did her good to see him beat the boys." The gang operated this way for years without serious consequences. Local law enforcement was either afraid of them or didn't care about their victims. When authorities did come looking, Patty would simply cross state lines. Maryland and Delaware police couldn't follow her across borders, but by the mid-1822nd, things began to change. Philadelphia had elected Joseph Watson as mayor. Watson was a Quaker who actually cared about helping kidnapped black people. Watson started working with Pennsylvania Governor John Andrew Schulze. Together, they began serious efforts to rescue kidnapping victims and prosecute the gang. In 1825 and 1826, Watson and Schulze successfully retrieved many young people who had been kidnapped and sold to Mississippi plantations. They paid for legal documents and even sent white witnesses to Alabama to verify people's identities. The gang started feeling pressure for the first time. Some members were arrested and tried, but the prosecutions mostly failed. In 1822, Joe Johnson was sentenced to public punishment and 39 lashes. The sentence was carried out, but he survived and continued his crimes. John Purnell was tried twice. First, he was acquitted in Mayor's Court, but in 1827, he was convicted in Philadelphia County Court on 2 counts of kidnapping. Purnell was sentenced to a $4,000 fine and 42 years in prison. He died in jail 5 years later. Henry Carr was also tried but acquitted. He fled to Alabama where he died in 1828. But Patty Cannon herself had never been seriously threatened. She continued operating from her Delaware property. The gang was getting more desperate and more violent. Anyone who threatened their operation was eliminated. The exact details of each murder are lost to history, but witness testimony and Patty's own confessions provide some information. One key witness was Cyrus James, a mixed-race man who had been enslaved to Patty since age 7. He grew up in her household and participated in many crimes. James later testified that he saw Patty take an injured black child, not yet dead, out in her apron. The child never returned. James served as a decoy for the gang. His mixed-race appearance and familiarity with Patty's operation made him valuable. Free black people trusted him more than they would trust white strangers, but James also witnessed the murders. He knew where bodies were buried, and eventually his testimony would help convict Patty. The gang killed victims for various reasons. Some children were murdered because they cried too much during transport. Crying could attract unwanted attention. Adults were killed if they kept insisting they were free. The gang preferred to sell people who acted like slaves. Defiant captives were worth less money. Some victims were killed simply because they had seen too much. Anyone who could identify gang members became a liability. Patty's property was the perfect place to hide bodies. It was rural and isolated. She owned enough land to bury people without neighbors noticing. The murders weren't random violence. They were calculated business decisions. Each death eliminated a problem that threatened the gang's profits. But Patty made one crucial mistake. She buried all the bodies on her own property. This created evidence that would eventually destroy her. In April 1829, a tenant farmer was plowing Patty's field when his plow struck the first skull. As he dug deeper, he found more bones. The farmer immediately contacted local authorities. Sussex County officials came to investigate the scene. They carefully excavated the area and found 4 complete skeletons. 3 were children. 1 was an adult male. All the victims appeared to be black based on skull measurements and other physical evidence available at the time. The discovery shocked the local community. Everyone knew Patty Cannon was involved in illegal activities, but multiple murders on her own property was unexpected. Delaware authorities moved quickly. They obtained a warrant for Patty's arrest and began gathering evidence. Cyrus James, the mixed-race man who had grown up in Patty's household, became their key witness. He provided detailed testimony about the murders and the gang's operations. Other witnesses came forward with information. Some were former victims who had escaped or been rescued. Others were community members who had seen suspicious activities. The evidence was overwhelming. Delaware authorities were confident they could finally convict Patty Cannon, but they needed to find her first. When news of the discovery spread, Patty had disappeared. Delaware authorities launched a manhunt for Patty Cannon. She was believed to be hiding somewhere along the Maryland-Delaware border. Meanwhile, investigators continued examining the crime scene and gathering witness testimony. The bodies were examined by local medical professionals. Based on the state of decomposition, they determined the murders had occurred over several years. One infant appeared to have been killed on the 26th of April, 1822. A male child was murdered the same day. An adult male was killed on the 1st of October, 1820. A Negro boy was murdered on the 1st of June, 1824. These dates matched witness accounts of when certain victims had disappeared. Cyrus James provided the most damaging testimony. He had lived with Patty for years and witnessed multiple murders. James described how Patty would kill victims who became inconvenient. She showed no emotion when taking lives. Other witnesses described the gang's kidnapping methods and transportation routes. They explained how victims were hidden and moved to southern slave markets. The investigation revealed that Patty's crimes went far beyond the 4 murders. She had been kidnapping and selling people for over a decade. Hundreds of free black people had been victimized by her gang. Most were sold into slavery and never seen again. But the 4 murder victims were different. They had been killed on Patty's property and buried there. This gave Delaware authorities clear jurisdiction and solid evidence. After several weeks of searching, authorities finally located Patty Cannon. She was arrested and brought to Georgetown, Delaware to face charges. In April 1829, a grand jury of 24 white men indicted Patty Cannon on 4 counts of murder. The indictments were signed by James Rogers, Delaware's Attorney General. She was charged with murdering an infant female, a male child, an adult male, and a Negro boy between 1820 and 1824. Patty was held in the Sussex County Jail in Georgetown while awaiting trial. The case attracted significant attention throughout Delaware and neighboring states. Many people were fascinated by the idea of a woman leading such a violent criminal operation. Female killers were rare in the 1822nd. Others were interested in the gang's reverse Underground Railroad operation. The contrast with the legitimate Underground Railroad was striking, but Patty Cannon would never face trial. On May 11, 1829, she was found dead in her jail cell. She was estimated to be between 60 and 70 years old at the time of death. Before dying, Patty had confessed to nearly 24 murders. She admitted to killing far more people than just the 4 bodies found on her property. Sources disagree about how she died. Some say she took poison to avoid execution. Others claim she died of natural causes. The novel, The Entailed Hat, written years later, attributed her death to self-administered poison. But this was fiction, not historical fact. What is certain is that Patty died before justice could be served. Her victims' families never saw her face trial or punishment. Patty Cannon's death ended the most notorious kidnapping gang in American history, but it didn't undo the damage they had caused. Hundreds of free black people had been kidnapped and sold into slavery. Most were never rescued or reunited with their families. The few gang members who were prosecuted received relatively light sentences compared to their crimes. Only John Purnell served significant prison time. Joe Johnson, Patty's son-in-law and main partner, was never seriously prosecuted for the murders. He had received 39 lashes for earlier kidnapping charges. But that was all. Patty's daughter, who had enjoyed watching victims being beaten, was never charged with any crimes. The case highlighted the tragic reality of systemic racism in 1822nd America. Free black people had few legal protections. Local authorities usually ignored their complaints and rarely investigated their disappearances. This wasn't about individual bad actors, it was about a system designed to devalue black lives. The gang exploited these racist attitudes to commit crimes with impunity. It also showed how state borders could be exploited by criminals. The gang's location on the Maryland-Delaware line helped them avoid prosecution for years. Mayor Joseph Watson of Philadelphia and Governor John Andrew Schulze deserved credit for their efforts to rescue victims and prosecute gang members. But they were fighting against a system that didn't value black lives. The Cannon Gang's crimes became part of American folklore. Books and articles were written about Patty Cannon for decades after her death. But many of these accounts mixed fact with fiction. Patty became a mythical figure, sometimes portrayed as more glamorous or clever than she actually was. The reality was much simpler and more disturbing. She was a woman who turned kidnapping and murder into a family business. The state of Delaware eventually placed a historical marker in Seaford dedicated to the victims of this evil enterprise and those who struggled against it. But for most of the victims, there are no memorials. Their names are lost to history. They were kidnapped, sold, and forgotten. Patty Cannon's body was buried in the Georgetown, Delaware jail graveyard. When the land was later developed, her remains were moved to a potter's field near the new jail. Strangely, her skull was separated from her other bones during one of these moves. It was put on display in various venues over the years. In 1961, the Dover Public Library displayed her skull. In 2010, it was loaned to the Smithsonian Institution for Scientific Study. Even in death, Patty Cannon remained a curiosity. People were fascinated by the woman who had led such a violent criminal empire. But the real story wasn't about one evil woman. It was about a family that chose profit over human life. Patty didn't work alone. Her daughter actively participated and enjoyed the violence. Her son-in-law, Joe Johnson, was equally guilty of kidnapping and murder. They recruited other family members and criminals to help with their operation. They turned crime into a multi-generational family business. Most disturbing of all, they got away with it for over a decade. This wasn't because the gang was particularly clever. It was because of systemic racism. Local authorities often knew what was happening, but rarely intervened when the victims were black. It took the discovery of bodies on Patty's own property to finally bring consequences. And even then, she escaped justice by dying before trial. This case reminds us that some families don't protect each other, they corrupt each other. When parents teach children that other people's lives don't matter, the results can be devastating. Sometimes the ones who say family comes first are the very ones who destroy it from within. Thanks for watching. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Also, subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories like this one. See you in the next